for joining us today. Let me just share some other slides. We're having some technical difficulties. All right. Hope this can be seen. Can my slides be seen? Sorry, just checking. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for our August webinar. I'm Cleona Yong, a research executive at SSR, and we are hosting this webinar over Zoom. And we're also streaming live on Facebook, so it will be stored there as a recording after this webinar is over. So if you head over to our videos folder of our Facebook page, you will see all of our past webinars there as well. So feel free to look through and share with your friends. So today we have part 2 of our selected undergraduate honors thesis by social work students. Typically in the month of July, we invite stellar students from the Department of Social Work to present their honors thesis. But this year there were so many to choose from and it was really hard to narrow it down. So we selected 8 and 4 of them are presenting today. The other 4 presented already in July. So you can head over to our Facebook page videos folder to see the recording of that if you'd like to. Yeah, another small announcement is that we have recently launched our LinkedIn page. So if you're on LinkedIn, do connect with us there. And on top of that, we also have a mailing list. So if you'd like to join that, you may do so as well. And you'll get direct mails about all of our events and our programs and our workshops. Yeah, so some of you may already know SSR holds monthly seminars, which have now been converted to online webinars, where we hope to provide a platform for researchers and practitioners in the social service sector to share the ideas, research, and findings with the larger community. And we also hope to provide this platform to spark some interesting discussions and perhaps even more collaboration opportunities. Yeah, so today's speakers are now social work graduates, class of 2021. And I will let them introduce themselves further later on, but briefly, we have Samuel, Michelle, and Abel with us. Sarah unfortunately could not join us today because of some unforeseen circumstances. And I know some of you who are attending today might have wanted to hear of her research, but she's allowed me to share her email. So if you'd like to get in touch with her, I will be flashing up her email later on. With us today is also the wonderful Dr. Chung Yo Jin as our moderator. She's a senior lecturer at the of social work at the S.R. Nathan School of Human Development at SUSS. And we specially invited her today because of her work and research on mental well-being and health, which ties in nicely with actually all of the topics of our speakers today. So for today's session, since we have 3 speakers, after each presentation, there will be a short time of Q&A. Let me show, the Pigeonhole QR code and link. So so you can submit your questions there for the speakers. There's about 5 minutes for each speaker to do Q&A. And we apologize in advance if there's not enough time to go through all of your questions, but we do hope that we get through quite a number of them. At the end of all 3 presentations, we might also open up the Zoom floor for questions through the camera and audio. So if you're in the Zoom room, you can feel free to turn your cameras on at the end of the session. Yeah, I think that's all I have. I will be sending the links that I've shown in the chat. And for now, if anyone had wanted to watch Sarah's presentation, she's not able to make it. So I'm going to leave her email, her email briefly up here. But I will pass my time to the first speaker, Samuel.
Hi everyone, are you guys able to hear me? Okay, yep, so I'm just going to share my screen and then you can let me know if you can see the slides. If it's not good. Okay, thank you. Okay, so as Fiona has said, my name is Samuel. I'll just share a bit briefly about myself. So I'm currently doing a master's, a graduate program at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. So I'm doing a master's in public policy. So and I technically have not graduated from social work yet as well because I'm doing it concurrently with my social work degree. So yes, I'm still very much a student. And just to share a bit more of like my passions, I do enjoy a lot of working with youth, especially youth at risk. I did an internship at Youth Infinity, and I think that also helped to solidify the passion I have to work with younger people. Yeah, and I think that will just bring me a bit nicely into my sharing for today, which is on my thesis topic titled Exploring the Relationship Between School Social Support and Hope Levels in Low-Income Children. Yeah. So let me just begin. So let me just begin firstly by sharing my research topic. So for this thesis, I actually wanted to identify the relationship between strength of school social support and level of hope in children from low-income families. So I will be explaining more of these uh, terms and like low-income, level of hope, social support later on in the presentation. Overall, my thesis had two main research questions. The first one was, how does the frequency of social support from the school system, specifically from teachers and classmates, predict the level of hope in children? In this case, frequency means how often do teachers or classmates show social support, and how does that predict hope levels? The second question is, does the importance a child places on social support moderate the relationship between the frequency of social support and the level of hope in the child? So this question seeks to understand if the value a child places on a social support type strengthens the relationship between frequency of social support and level of hope. So if you're a bit confused, I'll just explain these terms further in the following slide, so not to worry. So let me start first with what is social support. In this study, I used Tardy's model of social support to help me conceptualize and frame this concept. Tardy outlines four types of social support, mainly emotional, instrumental, informational, and appraisal. So emotional could be showing love and care to the child. Instrumental could be providing resources such as perhaps alarm clocks or pencils and pens. Informational could be providing them certain information about causes of actions. And appraisal would be about giving them feedback on how they behave or how they're doing. So these are four types that are outlined in Tardy's model. And I actually use this model firstly because I felt that it was a very simple and very structured way of helping me to understand what social support is. And secondly, also because it links to the questionnaire, which I will share more on later. So the next variable that I'll be sharing on is hope. So another question that I feel that most people have when I talk about my thesis is, how do you define hope and can you even quantify it? This is why it's important that we have a proper framework for this. And I use Snyder's hope theory to help me frame and quantify a hope. So Snyder conceptualizes three important concepts when it comes to hope. Firstly, it's goals, meaning future aims. Secondly, it's pathways, so the methods or ways to achieve goals. And lastly, is agency, which is the motivation and the willingness to act upon the pathways. And Snyder also emphasized the thinking processes of hope rather than the emotions. So it's not so much about how you feel, but rather how you think through these three concepts above and how that then relates to your emotions. So I chose to study hope because based on the literature reviews, hope was found to be an important adaptive pathway for low-income children to overcome the adverse effects of poverty. Yeah, so I did some research on how poverty actually affects low-income children and how these many barriers that they might be facing might actually deter them from having more positive life outcomes in the future. And I found that hope in itself actually helps low-income children to overcome these struggles and these issues. And I felt it was a very important concept then for me to dive into. So allow me just to share a bit more on the methods. For this study, I actually used a mixed methods approach, meaning I used both quantitative and qualitative aspects. So for the quantitative aspect, I performed a linear regression analysis on secondary data. So this means that I was actually not directly involved in the collection of the data, but I used data that came from Professor Esther Goh, and she was actually conducting a study on mother-child diets, trying to assess how family agency mediates the relationships between financial factors and home environments and the outcomes of mothers and children. So I use this quantitative data because it's actually very big. It's actually a very big study of 513 children. I felt that that gave a bit more credibility to the findings as well. So for the children, they had to actually answer self-report questionnaires. And I will show the questionnaires in the next slide. But for now, I'll just explain a bit more on the qualitative aspect of the study. I actually conducted two focus group discussions, each with 5 primary school teachers in them. And these primary school teachers had experience working with low-income children. I did not set a type of subject or age or gender In fact, because I just wanted a bit more experience that was very varied, different types of subjects, different age groups of teacher, even different number of working years. Yeah. So for the focus group discussions for analysis, I actually use N Vivo 11. And I'll just run through that a bit later. So sharing more about the methods that I'm using. So for the quantitative aspect for my statistical analysis, actually the research questions that I was aiming to find very much similar to the main research aims. So you can just read that there. For the qualitative aspect, the reason why I wanted to hold a focus group discussion with teachers was so that they could contextualize or learn a bit more of that contextual understanding about how social support is shown in the Singapore context. So I wanted to be able to I use the focus group discussions to illuminate a bit more about the statistical findings that I had or that I found. And the teachers also shared other questions, other questions such as what are the barriers that they had with showing social support, and also gave some suggestions on how social support could be provided. Yeah, so I asked them about their understanding of the results and their opinions on it, and then asked them a bit more on how they showed social support, and just to get a bit of examples and a bit of that contextual understanding. Okay, yeah. So now I'll move on to how social support was measured. So for social support, the child and adolescent social support scale was used to measure the frequency and importance aspect of social support. The scale actually has five different aspects, five different sources of social support. So from parents, from teachers, from classmates, from people who are working in the school, and also from close friends. But for this study, I zoomed into only teachers and classmates. So here's an example of the questionnaire for the teachers aspect. As you can see, there are two columns on the right. One says how often, that tests the frequency of social support, and the outmost right tests the importance aspect. So how important is social support to them? So for example, children can rate for the first question, my teacher cares about me. They can rate how often does the teacher show that they care for them, and how important is that to the child. So children can actually say that they are, like for question one, they're actually shown care always, but they could perhaps rate that as not important. So I was quite intrigued by this additional aspect of the questionnaire. I felt that it's important then to see how does the value that a child places on social support impact the relationship between frequency and the level of hope. So if a teacher says that they always show care, but if the child doesn't find that important, does that then weaken the relationship between frequency of social support and level of hope? So I'll move on now to how hope was measured. So we use the Children's Hope Scale. Children's Hope Scale actually has 6 items on the scale. And how you calculate it is that the total hope score is basically the summation of each item score. And the higher the hope score, the higher the level of hope. So here are some examples. For question 1, it says, I think I'm doing pretty well. Question 4 says, when I have a problem, I can come up with lots of ways to solve it. So that's actually testing the pathways of children. Are they able to come up with ways to reach the goals that they want, or to overcome obstructions? And in that sense, that translates into then how much hope would they have overall. So I'll move on now to the results and discussion. So for this presentation, I actually integrated both the quantitative and qualitative aspect into the slides. So I'll just share them one after the other. So for the first statistical result, the question was, how does the frequency of social support from teachers predict the level of hope in children? They found that a higher level of social support from teachers actually predicted a higher level of hope in children from low-income families. So as you can see, the beta value here is 0.32. This basically means that for every 1 unit of increase from the frequency of social support, it results in 0.32 unit increase for the level of hope in children. And the results were statistically significant. So I presented this finding to the teachers in the focus group discussion just to gain a bit of understanding or get a bit of more, to hear more of the experience regarding this. And the teachers actually agreed and supported the findings. And actually one of them jokingly said, it's the reason why we show social support in the first place, because we do believe that it results into hope. Yeah, so the teachers interestingly shared the different types of social support that were in Tadi's model, and also other types of support beyond the model, which I took as novel findings. and how these social support items actually led to hopeful outcomes and even pro-social behaviors for children. Yeah, so teachers shared also on the insight on the conditions necessary for social support. Here are some of the quotes that I took out from what the teachers shared. So the first one of the teachers shared that we always tell them that there is still hope. You can make the changes by little things just coming to school, that's all. So in this sense, it's also a bit of the informational support that teachers give. They were actually advising children that they should not give up in school, but to always come, so that in this sense, when you're coming to school, then you can make change. And this gives them that sense of hope. And the second quote, teachers actually shared very interestingly that they would actually buy alarm clocks for the students under them who might not have alarm clocks or who might not have certain stationary items. Yeah, and in doing so, showing this instrumental support, it results in the children understanding or knowing that the teacher actually wants them to be in school and that their presence is felt and important. Lastly, this is a quote to show how teachers actually the conditions that are required for teachers to show social support. So teachers just elaborated a bit more, saying that actually they play the role of an eagle eye, where they look at they have a macro view of what the children are going through, and when they notice that there's a need that the child might present or there's something that the child is lacking, they're then able to provide social support that is targeted to the needs of the child. So that was just quite interesting to see how it's not just about the fact that social support can lead to hope, but how then do teachers show social support and what is needed for them to show social support. I'll move on to the statistical result two. So this question was on how does the frequency of social support from classmates predict the level of hope in children? So very similar to the findings on teachers, a higher level of social support from classmates predicted a higher level of hope in children from lower income families. So once again, I presented this to teachers and they agreed with the findings. They also shared how classmate support to low-income peers could provide them a sense of belonging and led to even increased school attendance and then feeling hopeful about coming to school. The teachers also provided some novel insight into the integration between classmates and teacher social support. So firstly, these are some of the quotes. The first quote says that if we identify that they are really in need, we actually go secretly to their best friend and ask them to give extra support. So this shows how teachers are very intentional in asking classmates who provide social support to their lower income peers. And the next quote demonstrates also how important classmate support is, that it gives positive influence. It helps them to be more hopeful in terms of wanting to come down or wanting to come back to school. And the last question shows how important it is for teachers and classmates to work together. So if, as I mentioned earlier on in the way I conceptualized the study, I used the CASSS. So that actually looks at teachers and classmates support very separately. But through this study, I actually found or actually illuminated the fact that teachers and classmates support can actually be very well integrated. Teachers said that classmates were actually informants to them because a lot of times low income children might not be comfortable sharing with their teachers directly what struggles they might face, what problems they might be facing, and they go to their classmates instead to share. So it's the reason why a lot of schools actually have buddy systems where classmates can then raise up these problems or these issues to teachers, and teachers will then be able to provide the necessary support, social support to these low-income children. I'll move on now to the third and final statistical result. So this was the question on, does the importance a child places on social support moderate the relationship between the frequency of social support and the level of hope in the child? So for the teachers, it has found that for children who considered teachers' social support to be more important, the positive relationship between social support and hope was strengthened. So if you can look at the table here, in general, the frequency of social support and level of hope is positive for both high importance and low importance. But the difference here is that if children find that the social support is important, the increase in the level of hope is stronger and higher than if the child found that the social support item was not as important or not important. So this is just a graphical representation. The full black line that you see here represents high importance, children who rated social support as high important. And you can see there's a bit more steeper. So this just demonstrates the greater increase in hope levels when social support is shown. And for the findings, actually, the finding on classmates' importance of social support was not significant, and therefore I did not report it. So I asked the teachers, and I presented these findings, and I asked them perhaps if they could share some insight into why is it that for classmates the interaction effect was not significant. And some of the teachers actually said that older children place more importance on classmate support as compared to younger children, and because of that, older children might also have a bit more of that evaluative aspect to social support. They might then look at teachers' support and think, actually, I don't think this is very important, or actually, I think I would prefer another type of social support as compared to younger children who might just accept social support as it is. Yeah, so teachers just help to illuminate a bit more on the statistical finding that I had. The teachers then also shared the types of social support they perceive that low-income children rated as more important. Yeah, so I thought this was important because it's one thing to know that there's this interaction effect, but it's another thing to know what then is important to children that would cause a greater increase in their hope levels. So one thing that teachers shared is actually providing opportunities to low-income children is important. So let me just share some more quotes. So one of the teachers shared that's for students that they found they were very motivated and responsible, they actually wanted to give them additional responsibilities. And this helped children to believe that they could do something more. So this actually increased the children's motivation and in a sense granted them hope in the sense that they have more aims to work towards and they believe that they're able to achieve these aims. So very similarly, a teacher also shared about how she intentionally rostered a child to do the PA button and how he felt very important because he was the one who pressed the national anthem every morning and made him want to keep coming to school because he felt like he had a purpose, he had a goal to work towards, and that really motivated him. And lastly was some teachers found that for low-income students that were weaker in their studies, they actually created worksheets that were simpler for them to complete. So this actually gives them an opportunity for success. And when children experience this success, they also will want to, in that sense, success begets more success, and they feel that they can actually improve on that and feel more hopeful about future outcomes as compared to if they were always experiencing failure, they might be a bit more dejected, a bit more hopeless, feel more hopeless towards future successes. Yeah, so I'll just move on now to the implications. And for this, I've actually classified into two different types of implications. So the first implication is a bit more on the practical side. I believe that the findings of this study really demonstrate how important social support is in predicting the level of hope and how important social support from the school system is to help low-income children feel a bit more hopeful or to develop more hopeful thinking. Um, One thing to note here is that because of the limited time and resources that schools and teachers might have, it's important then to focus or to focus resources on social support items that children rate as important. So for example, in this study, we found that equal opportunities to low-income children is actually important to them. Having that success, having that experience that they might not have because of their financial constraints is something that's important to them. So schools should, rather than just providing generic social support types, it's important to focus on specific types that children, especially low-income children, find are important so that the increase in hope is actually greater. The second implication then is a bit more on the macro side. So restructuring workloads and school cultures, teachers shared that even though they want to provide social support, they actually struggle to do so because of how heavy the workload is, the fact that they're always caught in different kinds of meetings. And because of that, it kind of hindered them in providing the social support that they want to provide. Um, and in this case, what I propose then is the restructuring of workloads and school cultures, and especially in today's time, in today's context, to focus a bit more on the social support aspect, as opposed to just asking teachers to provide academic deliverables. The last thing is also to strengthen the linkages between teachers and other support staff in the school, such as student welfare officers or student counselors. This is because of the role that teachers play in being, like I said, the eagle eye, being able to observe the children, being able to spend a lot of time with the children. This puts them in a good position to be able to identify the needs that children might have, and because of that, they might then be able to share these results and share these findings with the student welfare officers or social workers in the school. Yeah, so I just to end off, I believe that this study is really important because especially in today's context when we have increased cases of poor mental health or children really just speaking up about the fact that they feel very hopeless or they don't really see a positive future for them. and therefore leading to a lot of mental health issues in Singapore especially. I think it's important then that we look at the school system as a time that students spend so much time in, and instead of a source of stress, why not use it as a source of social support that helps children to really look forward to the futures that they have ahead. And with that, thank you. Yes. Yes, you can also contact me on my email if you'd like to.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Samuel. I believe that this is very interesting and very relevant study in practice, and it's conducted in very timely manner. Yeah, we need to think about how we can support the children and youth at school context. Okay, we don't have much time, and then we have some question here. So it's one question is I think is you can answer very quickly. Can I clarify mixed method design was used in your study? What type of mixed method? Yeah, you use a sequential explanatory or exploratory, yeah, convergent, parallel. What mixed method do you use?
Yeah, so I actually used an exploratory mixed methods design involving the quantitative data on a single time period. So it's not a longitudinal, it's not sequential over different waves, but it's on wave one of a study. And then on top of that, the other method was the focus group discussions, quantitative aspect. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. This study mainly focused on the children from low-income families. So one question, social support will seriously counter-react with financial struggle, right? And hence affecting their sense of hope. How far can social support go in this? Yeah.
Okay, that's actually a very interesting question. I think it also demonstrates the importance of then asking people who are on the ground who are able to provide social support. So for the teachers, they did share that the students had a lot of financial constraints, and because of that, they actually didn't want to come to school, or they felt that there was no point. One teacher actually shared that students from low-income families actually don't want to pursue further education because they feel like my siblings didn't do it, and they're working now, and it's important, and I can just do that. But in this case, social support can come in the form of advice to students. So advising them on the fact that despite all these circumstances that you're facing and these constraints that you're facing, actually education is that way to break that cycle of poverty. Education is the way for you to get out of that cycle. So teachers take that bit of that back step, they step back from the student situations, and in that case, providing the social support that's targeted to the problems of poverty will then help them overcome these barriers. Yeah.
Okay, so you are using the social support model, and under that there are 4 different components. I'm not sure that is beyond your study, but you interview the teachers what support they are giving. But in the point of the children's perspective, I don't know what social support they think is most important, the most need. Is there anything fine? Because I think it's a children's perspective also quite important.
Yes, I agree. I think yes, I think that's a really good question. What do children actually find important? So I did this actually this was more of a separate study, my own curiosity. I actually went to analyze what children rated as the most important, and a lot of them rated things such as academic support help. So guiding them and teaching them on the work that questions that they might have, and also on the idea of fairness. Children actually wanted more equal opportunities and fairness, especially since the participants were from a low income bracket. I think they felt that a lot of times they were robbed of certain experiences that others from a high income bracket might have, and therefore having that fairness and opportunity was important to them.
Okay, thank you, Samuel. I think it's ran out time already. Okay, so over to you, Michelle.
Okay, thank you, Samuel, for that presentation. So hi, everyone. My name is Michelle. I'm currently a medical social worker at Tan Tock Seng Hospital, and I'm actually at the office now, so do pardon me if you hear some abrupt ambient noises. Yeah, so I think just moving along with the presentation, my thesis focused on self-harm and familial support. And I think for this particular presentation, I hope to help to address the question of how Singaporean youth can be emboldened to confide in their families in the event of self-harm. So let's go on. Okay. Yeah. All right. So to start off, I thought it'd be important to define self-harm. I think sometimes it can be, this term can be used quite loosely together with terms like suicide, suicidal thoughts, and ideation. But I think the main difference between self-harm and suicidal thoughts and ideation is that with self-harm, there is no ambition for individuals to actually end their lives or to die from harming themselves. Then after knowing that, you might ask, so if they don't want to harm themselves and they don't want to die, why is it still important? Well, research shows that self-harm is associated with repeated self-injury, and oftentimes these repeated offenses are of greater fatality. And I think most importantly, there's also a very strong relationship between self-harm now and future suicidal attempts. So as social workers who care about the protection of life, I do think that this is an issue that we should be concerned with. So if we look roughly at some statistics concerning self-harm, it has been recognized as a worldwide problem. It can be difficult to gauge because self-reports are not always accurate, but it is indeed a worldwide problem. And notably, it is disproportionately higher among our Singaporean youths. So if we look at the statistics in Singapore, almost 1/4 of our general population have hurt themselves before. But if we look at our youths, as high as 36% have actually harmed themselves. So there is a greater proportion among our youths. And if these statistics are not enough to alarm you, I think what is more concerning is the help-seeking trends. So majority of our youths who harm themselves actually do not seek help from any individual at all. We have found that help-seeking tends to be better among females and older youths, but generally the outlook is still very pessimistic and there's definitely room for improvement. So looking at our help-seeking trends, I thought it would be interesting to find out, who do our youth actually turn to if they do seek help? And then if we were to rank them, the first is, I think all of you can expect, but the first is that they will turn to their friends and their peers. The second is actually online community and resources. Families come in third place, and the least popular option is our professional services. So even though it's good that they have friends to support and our government is stepping up peer support measures, I think it's still concerning to know that our peers and online resources rank so highly in our youth preferences. And I think that is because they have been shown to increase the likelihood of engaging in self-harm. For our peers, they are often a source of inspiration for our youths. And for online communities, they often increase our youth's exposure to and often encourage our youth to engage in self-harm. So this is unfortunately the unintended consequence of relying on our peers and our online resources. And as for our professional services, there are still practical barriers that inhibit our youth from consulting in them, such as cost and confidentiality. And I think more importantly, for a subject or a behavior like self-harm, often our professional services only take place in a clinical and structured setting. But beyond that, there's only so little that our professionals can do. And self-harm is often so volatile, so spontaneous that it is quite out of their hands at times. And that is why I thought that I would focus my research on looking at the family. So there are multiple benefits of the family unit. Research has shown that they help to protect against future self-harm attempts. Secondly, they help to redirect our youth to professional services. And lastly, they also provide more timely support for the volatile nature of self-harm. Now, if they are so good, then what's the problem here? Well, I think as we all know, our families nowadays are facing increasing challenges in even identifying whether their children and their youth have engaged in self-harm. And they really can't seem to figure it out because we have become so strategic in concealing our scars, in concealing our efforts. So I thought that it will be good to figure out how to help these families and enhance familial support as well. And with that, my research took on two objectives. The primary objective was to apply the health belief model and the interpersonal theory of suicide to investigate whether our personal beliefs and affiliation to family will influence the likelihood that youths will take the initiative to confide in their families. And secondly, to see the relationship between certain demographic characteristics and help-seeking attitudes as well. So now I just want to take you through how I built the theoretical model for this research. So what you're seeing now is the health belief model, and it has been very useful in predicting and explaining health-related behaviors. So if you look at the screen, it briefly says that there are modifying factors which will affect personal beliefs and ultimately the action. For the sake of this research, I have tailored it more to the concepts that we are interested in. So in this case, our personal beliefs is the severity of self-harm, benefits of seeking help from family, self-efficacy, and barriers, so on and so forth. And instead of looking at the modifying factors relationship with the beliefs, because it's just a secondary objective, I decided to look at its direct relationship with the action, which is seeking help from family. Yeah, and there are two other factors which I termed familial affiliation. These were derived from the interpersonal theory of suicide. And what that theory proposed is that these two factors, when sufficiently high enough, would be able to predict the likelihood of engaging in suicide. So suicide, not self-harm. But I think considering that self-harm is a precursor for suicide, I thought that it would be beneficial to include these factors within our model as well. Yeah. So for the methodology, I adopted a cross-sectional observational approach. It was a purely quantitative study whereby individuals simply had to engage in a survey, an online survey. There were a total of 180 participants, and anyone could participate as long as they were within the ages of 21 to 35, was a Singaporean citizen or PR, and was unmarried. Yeah. So I would just jump straight to the results and conclusion because I think that's what we are all here for as well. So these are the sample demographics. As for age, the mean age was about 23.3. Looking at sex, there was a lot more females than males, almost 64%, and males were underrepresented if we compared to the SG population. Ethnicity was quite representative of the youths in Singapore. And as for religious, almost 2/3 of my sample size were religious, and the rest were not religious. Yeah, and the breakdown of the different religions can be seen at the side below here. Yeah. So moving on from the sample demographics, these were the between group demographic differences in help-seeking likelihoods that I found. So in terms of sex, females were more likely to engage their family support, even though this was not statistically significant. I went on to further find out if there were sex differences in the different individual factors, and I found that males reported poorer perceived familial affiliation and notably higher swatted belongingness. As for ethnicity, Chinese were superior in help-seeking attitudes, followed by Malays and Indians, although not significant again. And then another not significant finding was also that Chinese majority had a slightly higher help-seeking likelihood as compared to ethnic minorities. So ethnic minorities in this case were our Malays, Indians, and other smaller ethnic groups. Yeah, and I think quite notable was that even though there was comparable help-seeking attitudes, our ethnic minorities reported a significantly higher perceived barriers and perceived burdensomeness. Yeah, as for religious groups, there was a significant finding, and we found that youths with religious affiliation exhibited far higher help-seeking likelihoods or attitudes as compared to those without. And if we zoom into the specific differences in variables, our non-religious youth reported a higher thwarted belongingness. So they were likely to say that they did not really feel belonged to their family. Yeah. So moving on to the factors predicting help-seeking likelihood, to the larger theoretical model, both personal beliefs and familial affiliation was significantly associated with the help-seeking attitude when we performed a multiple regression that took into account religion. But if we compare between personal beliefs and familial affiliation, it does seem from the alpha value that personal beliefs has a higher or could account for a higher proportion of variance in the differences in help-seeking attitudes. Yeah, but even though one is higher than the other, when we conduct correlational analysis, personal beliefs and familial affiliation are indeed significantly correlated to one another. So even though one is higher than the other, it's important to note that they do exert mutual influences on one another. Moving on, this is the more straightforward part. So we found that with help-seeking likelihoods, there were higher perceived severity of self-harm, higher perceived benefits of familial help-seeking, lower barriers, higher perceived self-efficacy of help-seeking, lower perceived burdensomeness, and lower started belongingness. So all these were consistent with the kind of directions that each of the theories had proposed in the first place. And if we look at the individual factors in a multiple regression model, we found that perceived benefits, barriers, self-efficacy, and burdensomeness were significantly associated with help-seeking attitude. And among these, it was perceived self-efficacy, so perceived confidence, that was the most decisive factor. But we also noted that previously, although perceived severity and belongingness were significantly associated in a linear regression, they seem to have lost their statistical significance in a multiple regression model. So I think a conclusion that we can draw from this is that even though they are important, when we lump them together with these other factors, they are just comparatively less important in predicting the overall help-seeking likelihoods. Yeah, so I think all these results together really validates and corroborates the usefulness of this theory put forth that can help us to not only predict, anticipate, and explain help-seeking behaviors, but will also guide us in our intervention moving forward as well. So moving on to the implications for social work, I briefly split it into two parts. So one of it is what can we do for our youths who are already presented to services? And a second part would be how about those who are completely absent from the system? So starting from the former, I think the theory and these findings help us to be a bit more strategic in our assessment and our intervention. And it guides us to know that an emphasis on personal beliefs is preferred when working with these youths. And notably, we want to place greatest emphasis on building up their confidence and perceived self-efficacy in consulting their family members. But also maybe we can take a back seat on addressing perceived severity, yeah. But also, because there's an interrelation between personal beliefs and familial affiliation, I think any social worker who wants to work with youths who have engaged in self-harm will need to possess strong competencies in family dynamics and family systems perspective as well. This research also allows us to know certain cultural and demographic nuances. For example, for males, the prudent way to go forward might be to increase their sense of familial belongingness, which will increase their likelihood of family help-seeking and thereby their overall outcomes for mental health. And then secondly, with regards to ethnic minorities, we might want to look and place greater emphasis on alleviating the obstacles toward familial help-seeking, in this case, the barriers and perceived burdensomeness. Now, how about for youths who are not known to services? I think this research highlights some vulnerable groups that we should probably be more aware of within the community. And in this case, it might be our youths without religious affiliation because they are the least likely to seek support from their families and maybe the least likely to seek support from community as well. And with regards to policy implications, groups like Youth Without Affiliation might be those that are most absent from the powers of our Mental Health and Capacity, Mental Health Care and Treatment Act, or any other community resources. And then moving forward, we might even consider developing our mental health curriculum in schools to promote the use of familial support with regards to self-harm behavior. So for example, we could use it to debunk myths, teach students about difficulties their parents might face, and moderate their expectations of family as well. And I think to conclude this entire presentation, I'd just like to say that I'm in no way saying that we should only focus on the family and that the family is far superior to our peers, our online resources, and our professionals. But I think what we see is that there are gaps that our peers and professionals cannot address, that our families can come in to intervene with. So I just want to leave with this quote: we start and end with the family. And it's only by greater incorporating the family, supporting the family, and encouraging our youth to turn to their family that we can encourage better outcomes overall for youths who have engaged in self-harm. Yeah. And I included my email address below in case any of you are interested to find out more as well. So thank you.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. Yeah, it's quite important. Yeah, many researchers keep saying that youth don't want to seek help from the professions, and especially local context. That is one of the research and unpublished yet. Also have the same finding. Yeah, because it's a confidentiality issue and stigmatizations. One audience just wrote on the chat. It's quite interesting. So she mentioned that it is very interesting that more female engage in self-harm, while the suicide rate among youth are higher for males. So anything you found the differences between the gender in terms of the seeking help is not. Yeah, this context is only from the family. But any difference, gender difference in terms of the seeking help? I noticed you use some differences in terms of the personal belief and familiar affiliations, but how about the seeking help?
Okay, actually, I think if we link like these two statistics of self-harm and suicide together, it actually makes a lot of sense if we view self-harm as a precursor or like the first part of the spectrum to suicide, right? So I think like the audience mentioned, females or males tend to have a higher higher rates of completed suicide, while males have lower. It could be related to this, intermediary period of help seeking, actually, whereby we found that males do not really seek help from their families and possibly even the community. So even though at the start maybe I'm not too sure about the rates of or the gender difference in self-harm statistics, but I have read before that I think females are higher lah. But I think if anything, the fact that there's also this gender discrepancy in help-seeking behaviors could also be a possible explanation for our eventual statistics in suicide as well.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Already ran out the time, but one question from the audience is very, very interesting. So I want to bring in because the religious is one of very big factor, right? So question is that would religious families also be a barrier to help-seeking behavior?
Actually, initially, that was my hypothesis, that because most religions hold a generally negative attitude towards self-harm, so I thought those with religions would not be inclined to seek help. So it was interesting that they did. But I think one possible explanation here is that it is possible that for youth with religious affiliation, because they share the same religion with their family, possibly, not confirmed, possibly, so they are quote unquote on the same page lah. So it's easier to share as well. Yeah, as for youth without religious affiliation, there could be a possibility that they might have fundamentally different spiritual beliefs with their parents and are such not able to broach the topic. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Michelle, for sharing.
So sorry. Thank you.
Okay, now we have a last speaker. We will invite Adele.
All right, let me just share my screen.
Right, okay. Misha, can you stop sharing your, yeah. Okay.
You got it. Yeah, I think
Yes,
right.
right.
Okay. Okay, it's all up.
Okay, yeah,
Yes,
great.
So hi everyone, my name is Abel. Very happy to be given the opportunity to present the SSR's platform. And I think me along with my peers, we are very glad to be able to talk about our research thesis beyond academic submission to actually having potential impact practice implications in a social service. So I am currently unemployed. I will be starting my work at a children's home in a week's time. Yeah, so I'm really enjoying my time as a unemployed person. Yeah, so today my presentation topic is on minority stress, community connectedness, and mental health. A study of lesbian, gay, and bisexual young adults in Singapore. And I think to start off this, I know some of us would have our own personal values, beliefs, opinions, or preference with regards to this topic. And I think that is perfectly fine. I think we come in a very respectful manner, at least in this presentation. And I think this research and the presentation that I'm going to give is born out of really just an objective one to survey the needs of sexual minorities in Singapore. And I hope we can all come to listen to this with an open mindset and hopefully gain a thing or two out of it. All right, so I'm lagging. Okay, so there are two main reasons why I was motivated to start this research. First, obviously, there's a dearth of local research on LGBT issues in Singapore, largely attributed to the lack of public data on sexual identity. At the same time, we also know from our NOIPS studies that sexuality remain largely taboo and divisive. And second, I think currently, at least in the current climate, a lot of discourse surrounding queer issues tended to be politicized and often polarized into two camps. So when we hear of LGB, often we associate it with Section 377A because this is where the forefront of the conversation is at. We think about queer activists versus conservative religious groups. And most evidently, every year, we see pink versus white. So this is what we often feed ourselves in the social media. So I think this unintentional polarizing effect could actually fear casting complex LGBT experiences into a simple for against right-wrong dichotomy. And this risks distracting us from recognizing that there are lived experiences of individuals, our friends, our peers, our co-workers, family members even, who may be struggling themselves. And so this is really where I'm coming on when I approach and study this topic. All right, so the minority stress model, this is the model which the research rests on. And the entire model is actually more complex than it is. But for the purpose of this presentation, I simplified it into these three components. First, minority status. I think as with any minority status, as an ethnic minority, as a religious minority, and in this case, as a sexual minority, we are bound to experience minority stresses associated with the status and identity. And Mayer suggests that these processes can be largely put into distal and proximal. Distal meaning more external objective stresses that are independent of an individual's perception or response, whereas proximal stresses are more dependent on how an individual kind of understands and unpacks and copes with it. And in just a bit, I'll just explain a little bit more into what these stresses actually mean. And of course, with these stresses, they are bound to have impacts on mental health. And in this case, in this study, we are concerned with psychological distress, which looks into both depression and anxiety components. So as a lesbian, gay, or bisexual young adult in Singapore, we are bound to face the social stresses. These are discrimination events, the experience of external objective stressful events and conditions that can impact on an individual. So this could come in the form of very explicit workplace rules against sexual minority. or perhaps, in schools, in terms of how teachers, organize students within a classroom. A more implicit and subtle version of discrimination is microaggression. And these are unconscious and often unintended acts of discrimination. And this could really come out of a lack of understanding, ignorance, and lack of sensitivity to the issue. But these are not intended to harm the individual. But as we can see, this is quite a huge, has quite a huge bearing on individuals. On a more proximal side, individuals do face internalized homophobia, and these imply some form of life course perspective, because individuals may be fed with heterosexist material or homophobic materials, or the lack of positive portrayal, and these may be internalized by the individual, and an individual becomes highly vigilant towards other people. Second, concealment of sexual identity, when an individual intentionally hides their sexual identity so as to avoid prejudice responses associated with the disclosure, and closely related to it is rejection anticipation. So this is when an individual actually appraise potentially prejudiced situations and eventually become hypervigilant for fear of facing the perceived consequences of actually being discovered. So these 5 components do impact greatly on an individual who identifies as LGB. So outside of minority stress processes, this research is also concerned about protective factors, specifically on group level social support, on LGBT community connectedness. So what exactly does community connectedness mean or imply? So in this research, it broadly refers to a sense of belonging or in-group affiliation to the greater community consisting of other sexual minorities. So specifically, we are not measuring the actual participation, the frequency of participation, the extent of participation. We are looking at the level of attachment, of closeness, of how positive they feel towards the larger group. So this is the definition that this research has adopted. So what exactly does this study want to find, which is essentially the research questions? First, I think simply put, is there an association between the levels of minority stress and the levels of psychological distress among LGBT young adults in Singapore? And a secondary question we are interested is whether the community connectedness, this group level support, have a moderating effect on this relationship. I have previously introduced 5 stresses, but in this moderation exercise, we're only focusing on these 3 components, and these are pairings informed by existing literature in the West. So this is a cross-sectional quantitative study. It is samples are collected from snowball convenience sampling through schools, through Pink Dot, Google Chaga, and some social service agencies who are willing to publish. Inclusion criteria, they have to be Singapore citizens aged 18 and 35 and either identify as LGB. And as part of this sieving out process, we take away individuals who may identify beyond the gender that they were born in. So if they may identify as trans, these individuals were excluded from the study because they would be better served with measures specific to gender minority, which is not the focus of the study. So measures, I would not go into detail, but basically there are covariates that are being collected: gender, sexual identity, ethnicity, SCS, and religiosity. So we want to control for these confounders, and we measured minority stress through this measure, and then we measured psychological distress through the Kessler K10 scale, and community connectedness was through this scale by UMHS, which I'll be happy to share outside of this presentation. So I think the research, we had a total of 469 participants. And out of these, a large 37% of them are gays, 37% are bisexuals, and a smaller proportion of 26.4% are lesbians. An average age of the participants was 27 years old, very ethnic diverse, slightly lower percentage of Malays, but I think overall still pretty much in sync with national level data. And so in general, most people are non-religious, highly educated working professionals. So to give us a sense of what the K10 score is, so we basically sum up the scores, and the average score for the sample is 26.1. And I borrowed this Australian study by the Department of Human Services, so as to kind of give us an idea of what exactly does this value mean, right? So according to the cadence score of 26.1, the likelihood of having a mental health disorder is moderate risk. So now to the findings. So for the first question, is there an association between minority stress and psychological distress? As an aggregate variable, higher levels of minority stress is significantly associated with poorer mental health outcomes, which means elevated stress levels, higher levels of psychological distress. When we actually break down the minority stress components into its 5 individual stress components, we saw that microaggression, internalized homophobia, and rejection anticipation are significantly associated with poorer mental health outcomes, with microaggression having the largest effect, followed by rejection anticipation and then internalized homophobia. In contrast, discrimination events and identity concealment did not have a significant relationship, which I'll be happy to explain why if we have time later on. All right, so to the second research question, does LGBT community connectedness have a moderating effect between these stress variables and psychological distress? So interestingly, community connectedness only significantly moderated the influence of microaggression on psychological distress. And this was not observed for discrimination events and internalized homophobia, though they were expected in my original hypothesis. So to understand, I think, greater as to this relationship of moderation between microaggression and community connectedness, we actually probe the interaction effect. So if you see on the x-axis, this is the level of microaggression, and on the y-axis is the level of psychological distress. The green line shows individuals who have high levels of community connectedness. The blue line shows individuals who have low levels of community connectedness. And naturally, all 3 lines shows a positive slope. So higher levels of microaggression, higher levels of psychological distress. However, if you just focus on this component, at lower levels of microaggression here, individuals who are more connected, meaning the ones in blue, experience lower levels of distress as compared to those who are less connected, which shows that community connectedness seems to have some stress buffering effects, which is consistent to our ideas of social support theory. However, if you look at higher levels of microaggression, we tend to see something different. Those who are more connected, the ones in green, actually experience higher levels of distress as opposed to those who are less connected, which seems to be a little bit contradictory to our ideas of social support. So it seems that if I am more connected, you experience greater distress. So this is something which is interesting, and I'll be happy to share a little bit about my interpretation after speaking to some individuals and also based on research. So now moving on to the implications of this study into what we can actually look out for and kind of do in our workplaces. So first, I think naturally, it is important to assess sexual orientation as part of practice, just as how we would for other demographic variables like ethnicity, age, marital status, which could give us some ideas as to mental health risk, for instance. So specifically, we know from the research that microaggression had the largest kind of predictive effect in terms of psychological distress. So these could allow practitioners to equip clients with adaptive coping skills that could aid in reducing negative effects of microaggression. For instance, learning how to kind of appropriately respond to discrimination without putting themselves at greater emotional vulnerability. At the same time, we also know that rejection anticipation, which had the second largest effect, which means that clients, before even coming to the center, before visiting our offices, are likely to already anticipate some form of rejection because of how they have grown up with, for instance, or their experiences in the past. So it is important for us to reassure clients of non-discriminatory practice and actively foster an environment where individuals feel safe to disclose and share. And this could start off very small, with such as reviewing semantics, for instance, including more inclusive terms, such as offering an option of prefer not to say or significant other, as opposed to very heterosexist terms such as husband, wife, married, single. And this will allow us to probe more later on in our assessment. At the same time, I think it's important for practitioners to be equipped with language repository that are sensitive to queer experiences, because a lot of times it is unintended, but microaggressions work in that way precisely. Second, the nuances in community connectedness. So we saw that community connectedness can bring about stress ameliorative effects, which is great, which means that we can promote greater sense of belonging through group support. However, we also noted that for those who are very connected, there is a possibility that they may also experience heightened distress. And after speaking to practitioners on the ground and also consulting research, this could be due to several reasons. First, it could be due to prejudice experiences stemming from increased visibility, as well as possible emotional strain from over-identification. For instance, if I have a very good relationship with my family and a second person may not have a very good relationship or attachment with the family, if the same level of discriminatory regard is being meted out to both my family and a friend's family, perhaps I would become more aroused, emotionally agitated if the attack is targeted at my mom, for instance, because I have a very close relationship with her. So this could explain why the distress levels are higher when level of connectedness is more. It's higher. Yeah, so I think a practice nuance is that instead of discouraging individuals from further developing connections, it is perhaps more wise to focus on equipping clients with adaptive strategies that could help abate the ill effects of discriminatory regard. For instance, maintaining healthy boundaries and not being over-identified with the group. But of course, these are based on secondary accounts, and I think that further research is obviously needed to kind of make sense of this. Right. Third, important to recognize intersectionality in practice. In my research, I think non-Chinese respondents experienced significantly higher levels of distress compared to the Chinese. At the same time, there was also gender disparity. Lesbian and bisexual females experience higher levels of distress compared to gay and bisexual males. So this is something which we will have to keep in mind when there are multiple intersections of identities that could increase the risk of mental health distress. Fourth, we know that a lot of work may be done at a micro level, but they are at best mitigative in nature for the very fact that stresses such as discrimination events and microaggression, these are independent of an individual. These are environment structural kind of forces. So I think it is easy to say public education, but this is something which really requires a greater conversation. How can we respectfully bring such conversations into the public and helping individuals become more aware of the nuances and thereby hopefully foster a culture of empathy, because it is through increasing sensitivity and appreciation for differences that creates a more kind, understanding society. And lastly, in terms of implication for social work education specifically, it is important for education institutions to offer syllabi specific to practice competency with LGBT community. And I think this is evident in a few research. One, I think by a few members of the social department, the first one, and the second by Uga Chaga, and both shows that actually majority of practitioners on the ground lack sufficient training, do not feel confident, but yet they still deal with queer clients. So this is a point which can be quite jarring, because if you're not equipped, how do you navigate these issues? And second, I think it's important to encourage and facilitate safe environments for respectful and open discussions on queer practice. Speaking from experience, I think in classrooms, many of us come from very different. I come from a very conservative Christian family, and sometimes navigating religion, personal beliefs, professional responsibilities, ethical issues can be challenging. But it is precisely in the classroom, in our education, to be a social worker, that creates that safe environment for us to respectfully talk about these challenges and seek guidance. Last slide, there are some notable observations. First, bisexuals were statistically significantly younger than gays and lesbians, and these could be attributed to generational differences in sexual labeling, especially in the US. I think just 2 months ago, they did a survey and realized that more younger persons identify with more than one sexual identity. So the whole idea of sexual fluidity or gender fluidity has become more normal, especially with the influx of different content that we see on Netflix, for instance. This could also be due to developmental phases difference. Individuals who are younger may be in a phase of discovery, of curiosity, and may later settle on for a certain fixed sexual identity later on, or may remain fluid thereafter. Amongst bisexuals, a large disproportionate number of women, 78%, identify as bisexuals as opposed to men. And there is also higher levels of psychological distress among younger LGBT respondents. Now, of course, you may ask me why, but these are just notable observations which were side findings from the study, which I did not deliberate which I did not kind of research on them deliberately, but these are just food for thought that I thought I could leave with everyone at the end of this research. So I think just last phrase for me, I think we can all start small, and there are many implications that could come out from this study. And I think it is up to our owners to reflect a little bit on our values, and hopefully in our own little workplaces in schools to create conversations that could have this minority group in mind, as opposed as we would of any other minority groups. So with that, I thank you, and that's my email if you have any questions I would like to chat up.
Okay, thank you very much, Abel. I'm sure this is very valuable in practice. We haven't done much in this area. We haven't discussed much about the gender issue among youth. So yeah, but unfortunately, we don't have enough time, but we have very quick questions. It's about the statistical analysis. Question is that, yes, okay, can you explain why sexual identity, ethnicity were chosen as a covariate? Because you are doing the multivariable analysis, right? Abel, unmute yourself, please. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think for ethnicity, I think I was looking at, what are the potential confounders that could impact on the association of my study. And ethnicity, I think we know that individuals who identify as ethnic minority group may experience stresses precisely because of their minority status, and they could potentially face additional microaggression that comes not from sexual identity, but also from their racial minority status. So there are many research on that. That's why ethnicity was included. As for sexual identity, this was something which I had deliberated because I was thinking of whether to add this in or to add gender. But eventually, I think after consulting with the prof and also looking at past studies, I think sexual identity seemed to have okay, if I could share, I guess, a study that I have in mind based on what I've read in literature. So there are some studies that purport that lesbian individuals will face lower levels of stress as compared to gay persons. And these are very contextual to where you are at, right? In certain countries, for instance, in Singapore, if you see a lesbian couple holding hands or engaging in PDA, this may seem slightly more acceptable. And if you compare that to, say, a two male couples in the public, gay couples, the very same acts could incite greater reactions from the public. So there are contextual differences that could account for differences in stress levels. That's why sexual identity has been chosen. But this is one of the many reasons from research. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Abel. It's quite interesting. One of the interesting findings is that the participant, young people with a higher, stronger community connectedness, they are more vulnerable, right? Actually, there's more, they have a more psychological distress when they impact something. So I guess as a community connectedness, what does it mean to them? It's not very clear maybe. And then one of the audience suggests, very interesting, yeah, she or he said, could the moderation be explained by the degree of acceptance an individual has about her sexual orientations? So maybe higher acceptance that could be related to higher connectedness too. Yeah. So it's maybe, yeah, community connectedness, even though you conceptualize in your study, but to participants, and maybe they have a different idea or perceptions of what this mean to them. Yeah.
So actually, for community connectedness, there is a specific skill that is being used, and I think specifically. Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry. I need to go off in a very quick while. Okay, so community connectedness, specifically because there are various options in terms of community. There is the participation, there is the attachment. So the questionnaires that were specific to community connectedness were looking at the attachment. So they were looking at three main components. One is how close an individual feels to the community. Second is the level of attachment. And if I remember correctly, And the last one is whether they feel that as a community, they could actually achieve greater purposes. For instance, I believe that as a community, we'll be able to achieve greater political rights for the community. So they are quite specific in that regard. But I do agree that definitely a person's openness, level of openness and acceptance does affect the moderation. Yeah. That is one limitation.
Okay, thank you. We almost end up, and all three presentations bring a very excellent and interesting finding from their own research. And I always very exciting to see the quantitative research using the very advanced statistical analysis. The two of them is testing the moderation effect. But this research is, yes, I'm sure it could be a very good idea and insight to the practice. Yeah, so that is a kind of evidence-based practice. Yeah, good job. Thank you very much of your sharing, Michelle, Samuel, and Abel. Thank you. So over to you, Cleona.
Yes,
Just
thank you
ran
so
out
much.
the time already. Sorry.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Thank you so much, Dr. Chung, for the amazing moderation and facilitating the questions. And thanks, I think Abel has gone off already, but thanks to him, Michelle and Samuel for your very detailed presentations and for answering the questions. And thanks to our audience for attending our webinar today and sticking around till now. It was really great to see all the questions and interactions. And as Abel and Dr. Chung said, yeah, we at SSR really do hope that we provide this platform where research and practice can interact. And yeah, that's why we have our seminars, especially every July and this year August as well, to allow students to present their theses. And okay, before we go off, I just have a few announcements. And before that, I will just launch this poll, which we do every seminar, just to get your feedback a little bit. And so you may do that while I give other announcements. So as I had mentioned, you can find us on Facebook. I'm going to go through these slides quite quickly because we're running out of time, but here are the QR codes and the links. We are also on LinkedIn now, so do follow us there. Hope you have your phones ready to scan this. We also have a mailing list where we send out all our announcements about workshops, publications, and events. And if you do have any feedback or questions or things you do want to see in upcoming seminars, you can email me at cleona@nus.edu.sg. And finally, one more thing, join us for our next webinar, which is happening 15 September, so less than 3 weeks away. We will be having Dr. Stephanie Chalk and Grace Toh with us to present their findings on food insecurity in a rental neighborhood. And Dr. Xavier Corgill, who will be moderating the session. So hope to see you there. And yeah, stay in touch with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or through email. And that's all for now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the presenters and Dr. Chung for moderating. I think we are free to leave now, but I will just keep the slides here so that people can look through.